Video 2, Defining Axis Lengths and Limits. Previously we learned defining plots and drawing simple sine and cosine plots. In this video we're going to take a look at importing plotting functions using axis function and setting minimum and maximum values of x and y parameters. Here we'll demonstrate a variety of useful axis properties around limits and lengths that we can configure in Matplotlib. First, we'd fire up IPython. After this, we import the plotting functions right away. Now, we'll start experimenting with various properties of axes. Just call an empty axis function, which will return the default value for the axis. Here, the values represent xmin, xmax, ymin, and ymax respectively. If you're in interactive mode and are using a windowing backend, a figure like this with an empty axis will be displayed. If we don't use axis or other settings, Matplotlib will automatically use minimum values that allow us to see all data points on one plot. If we set axis limits to be less than maximum values in a dataset, Matplotlib will do as told and will not see all points on the figure. This can be a source of confusion or even error, where we think we see everything we drew. One way to avoid this is to call autoscale, Matplotlib pyplot autoscale, which will compute the optimal size of the axis to fit the data to be displayed. Similarly, we can set values for the x and y axes. So, here -1 is xmin, 1 is xmax, -10 is ymin, and 10 is ymax. Now we call the axis function. Again, if you're in interactive mode, this will update the same figure. Furthermore, we can also update any values separately using keyword arguments, kwargs, setting just xmax to a certain value. If we want to add new axes to the same figure, we can use matplotlib.pyplot.axes. We usually want to add some properties to this default call, for example rect, which can have the attributes left, bottom, width and height, in normalized units, 0, 1, and maybe axis bg, which specifies the background color of axis. There are also other properties that we can set for added axes, such as sharex, sharey, which accept values for other instances of axes and share the current axis, xy, with other axes, or parameter polar that defines whether we want to use polar axis. Adding new axes can be useful, for example, to combine multiple charts on one figure if there is a need to tightly couple different views on the same data to illustrate its properties. If we want to add just one line to the current figure, we can use functions axhline and axvline. They will draw horizontal and vertical lines across axes for given x and y data values respectively. Let's see how it looks as a figure. We'll continue in the same IPython session. We'll see a figure like this. Here we see that just calling these functions without parameters makes them take default values and draw a horizontal line for y equals 0, axhline, and a vertical line for x equals 0, axvline. Now we add another horizontal line for x equals 4. So that's our updated figure. You can see the line for x equals 4 has been added. Similar to these are two related functions that allow us to add a horizontal span, rectangle, across the axes. These are matplotlib.pyplot.axhspan and matplotlib.pyplot.axspan. The function axhspan has ymin and ymax as required parameters that define how wide the horizontal span is. Analogous to this, axvspan has xmin and xmax to define the width of the vertical span. Let's take a look at the grid now. Having a grid in a figure is turned off by default, but it can be easily switched on and customized. A default call to matplotlib.pyplot.grid will toggle the grid's visibility. Other parameters for control are as shown here. Which. This defines what grid tick type to draw. It can be major, minor, or both. Axis. This defines which set of grid lines are drawn. It can be both x or y. Axes are usually controlled via matplotlib.pyplot.axis. Internally, axes are represented by several Python classes. The parent one is matplotlib axis.axis, which contains most methods to manipulate axes. A single axis is represented by matplotlib.axis.axis class, where the x-axis uses matplotlib.axis.xaxis and the y-axis uses matplotlib.axis.yaxis class. Cool! So that's all about axes. In this video we have learned defining axis lengths and limits. Great! In the next video we'll go through plotline styles, properties and format strings.